All right, so the next thing we're going to start talking about is what is a function? Now, a function is a relation in which every element in the domain is mapped onto only one element in the codomain. So very important. A function is a relation in which every element in the domain is mapped onto only one element in the codomain. So for a relation, so the first thing is that a function is a relation. So we could conclude that a function is a special type of relation. We could also say that every function is a relation, but not every relation is a function. So let us say you have the parent set. This is relations. And inside of that set, you have a special type of relation, set of relation called functions. So every function is a relation, but not every relation is a function. So a function is a relation in which every element in the domain is mapped onto only one element in the codomain. So one thing about the function is that every element in the function must be mapped. If there's an element in the function that is not mapped, the relation is not a function. Every element in the domain must be mapped to only one element in the codomain. All right, so let us talk about how do we test for a function. So test for a function, arrow diagram. Guys, remember, a function being a relation means that the function can be represented several ways. Because a function is a relation and a relation can be represented as an equation, a function can be represented as an equation. A relation can be represented as a graph, so a function can be represented as a graph. A relation can be represented as a set of ordered pairs, so a function can be represented as a set of ordered pairs. But what we need to be able to do is need to be able to analyze a function however it is represented and say if the function is, if the relation is or is not a function. Guys, test for a function, arrow diagram. So test for a function, arrow diagram. Here it is. If only one arrow leaves every element in the domain, the relation is a function. If only one arrow leaves every element in the domain, the relation is a function. Now, if more than one arrow, or if no arrow leaves any element in the domain, the relation is not a function. So I'll say it again. If only one arrow leaves every element in the domain, the relation is a function. If more than one arrow, or if no arrow leaves any element in the domain, the relation is not a function. Guys, example 2, example 4. Now, guys, I want you to go through example 4. Example 4 says, for each of the following, state if the mapping is or is not a function, and then you need to state the type of mapping. I will do one of them for you. So I'm doing A. I'm doing I, and I want you to do the rest. Guys, if I want to test if this relation is a function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the domain elements. Now, you see if one arrow is leaving every one of these, the relation is a function. So I have 3 domain elements, and from each of them, only one arrow, one arrow, one arrow, one arrow. So one arrow is leaving every element in the domain. And if one arrow is leaving every element in the domain, the relation is a function. If more than one arrow, or if no arrow leaves any element in the domain, the relation is not a function. Guys, for I, because one arrow is leaving every element in the domain, this relation is a function. And this function is a one-to-one mapping. Guys, please complete example 4. You have 5 minutes. All right, so resuming the recording. We're looking at II. So one arrow is leaving this, one arrow leaves this, one arrow leaves this. So one arrow is leaving every element in the domain. Therefore, this relation is a function. Here we have 2 elements in the domain is mapped onto 1 in the codomain. So what we have is many going to 1. This is a many to 1 mapping. So the statement below says 1-to-1 and many-to-1 relations are functions. So we did a 1-to-1. The one-to-one relation is a function, and the many-to-one relation is also a function. So 1-to-1 and many-to-one relations are functions. Turn the page. All right, here we have 1 arrow leaving this, but 2 arrow leaving this. So this is not a function. This is not a function, and the type of mapping is 1 to many. One element in the domain is mapped to many in the codomain. And so the 1 to many here is not a function. The next one we have is 2. 1 here is mapped to 2. So this is not a function because every element in the domain must be mapped to only 1. So here we have 1 element that is mapped to 2. So this is not a function. We have 1 going to many, and we have a situation of many going to what? 1. So the combination of 1 to many and many to 1 is a many to many mapping. It's a many to many mapping. So the 1 to many and many to many relations are not functions. All right. Looking at this, 1 arrow leaves this, 1 arrow leaves this, no arrow leaves this, 1 arrow leaves this. This is not a function. It's not a function because no arrow is leaving the 3rd element. If you have a situation where no arrow is leaving an element in the domain, the relation is not a function. For V, we have 1 arrow leaving this, 1 arrow leaves this, 1 arrow leaves this. Remember, if 1 arrow leaves every element in the domain, the relation is a function. So this is a function. Janelle, earlier we're asking about the range. The range is the set of all elements in the codomain which are images of elements in the domain. So, like for example, the 4th diagram, this diagram here, that diagram, 1, 2, 3 would be in the range, but this would not be in the range. So if you have a situation where there's one element in the codomain that nothing is mapped to, you can't call it range again. For you to call it range, every element in the codomain must have something mapped to it. If one of them don't have anything mapped to it, it's no longer called range, it must be called codomain. So codomain is the parent word and is the parent term, and it's called range when every element in the codomain has something mapped to it. So here I could call this range, but over here I must call this codomain. I'm calling it codomain because there's one element there that has nothing mapped to it. All right.